Life is hard. It's not really a complaint, is it?
Yeah.
Or a judgment, just a fundamental, undeniable fact of being human.
Yeah, it really is. We all face challenges.
Right, like the frustrating reality of physical pain or the ache of loneliness sometimes, that feeling of falling short.
The sheer scale of injustice you see in the world and, that nagging question underneath it all, does any of it actually mean anything?
Exactly. And our source material for this deep dive really leans into that reality. It doesn't pretend there's an easy fix or a path without struggle.
No, it presents philosophy differently, not as a cure, but more like a map, maybe,
Yeah.
for navigating this often pretty rocky terrain of human existence.
A map. I like that. So let's explore this map. Our guide today is drawn from excerpts from Kieran Setiya's book, Life is Hard, How Philosophy Can Help Us Find Our Way.
And our mission really is to pull out the key insights. We want to see how philosophical thinking can actually equip us, help us cope with these common hardships.
Not by finding some perfect, ideal life free of problems.
No, not at all. More like helping us find enough in the life we actually have, difficulties and all.
What strikes me at the book is how grounded it feels.
Yeah.
It's not like abstract philosophy floating way above everything.
Definitely. Satiya's own experiences dealing with chronic pain that started in his 20s, his mother's early onset Alzheimer's, what he calls a premature midlife crisis at 35.
Wow, yeah.
Those things clearly shaped his perspective. You feel like it's coming from someone who gets it, who knows hardship firsthand.
That personal angle is key, isn't it? It sets a tone of just direct acknowledgement.
Right. The promise isn't that philosophy makes life easy or gets rid of suffering. It's more about maybe challenging some traditional ideas, looking closely at what hardship is, and finding that just acknowledging reality instead of denying it or trying to justify suffering, well, that itself can be a source of clarity and solace even.
Okay, that seems like the perfect place to start then. Just acknowledging hardship. Sounds simple, but, traditional philosophy often seemed focused on defining the ideal life, right? The best way to flourish.
Exactly. But Setiya argues that focus kind of sidelines the widespread reality of suffering we actually live with day to day.
hmm
I mean, think about the isolation during the pandemic or persistent inequality, climate anxieties. These aren't just background noise for so many people, they're central.
And we have that powerful, almost knee-jerk reaction, don't we? To try and make sense of suffering. Find a reason. Everything happens for a reason.
Yes, and the book really flags that urge. It's called theodicy when it's about God's justice, but we do it ourselves too.
Like telling someone it's for the best after something awful happens.
Right, that same impulse. Setiya brings up the book of Job and the lesson there. Job was right. He didn't deserve his suffering. His friends, trying to rationalize it, they were wrong. We don't always deserve what we endure.
So a really key insight right from the start is that philosophy's job isn't justifying suffering or making it vanish, but just acknowledging it, looking closer, describing what's actually there.
Precisely. And that's why he sees philosophy as continuous with, say, literature, history, memoir, film.
Oh, okay.
Other ways we try to make sense of and describe human experience and all its messiness, its difficulty. It's about paying attention to adversity itself, not just explaining it away.
And the goal isn't some state of perfect happiness or the ideal life,
No.
but coping with hardship in a way that still makes your life feel worth wanting. That feels much more achievable, resilient maybe.
It is. It shifts the focus, doesn't it? From some unattainable peak to finding value and meaning within the realistic shape of human life, even when it's painful.
Speaking of painful, the book kicks off its deeper look at specific hardships with the body infirmity or physical vulnerability. And this is where Setiya shares his own story.
Yeah, he really details it. The symptoms starting when he was just 27, sharp pain, constant urge to urinate, spending nights on the bathroom floor.
God, that sounds awful.
And years of doctors, no clear diagnosis, no treatment. He just had to figure out how to live with these flare-ups that totally disrupted his life.
It's such a powerful reminder that, our bodies being vulnerable isn't some exception. It's just part of being human.
Yeah.
He also talks about his mother-in-law, Susan Gubar.
Right, the writer.
Yeah.
Her experience with ovarian cancer, surgery, and reflecting on how illness is often strangely absent or misrepresented in literature and art, thinking about Virginia Woolf, Hilary Mantel.
Yeah.
These personal stories really bring home the lived reality of physical hardship in a way abstract ideas often don't. And they lead to an important point from disability activists,
Good tip.
that physical disability itself doesn't have to make life worse if there are adequate accommodations in society. This really pushes back against views, maybe going back to Aristotle, that the best life has to be one lacking in nothing.
Yeah, that lacking in nothing ideal. It does seem to automatically frame any disability as inherently negative.
And Setiya challenges that. He argues disability, like a bodily malfunction, isn't bad in itself. Its negative effects are, well, they're contingent. They depend on the circumstances, on how it impacts your ability to do things you value.
So it's different from illness or disease, which are biological processes.
Totally, yeah. The point is the badness comes from how it affects how you live, not just the biological fact itself.
That's a really crucial distinction. Makes me think of that Taoist parable, the farmer and his luck, the maybe story.
Exactly. The horse runs away, bad luck. Maybe. The horse returns with more horses, good luck. Maybe. Son breaks his leg, bad luck. Maybe. He avoids the draft, good luck. Maybe. It's perfect, isn't it? Shows how seemingly bad things can have unpredictable outcomes.
But Satiya is careful there, right? He notes the limits of applying that directly to disability.
He is. While it might help reframe some setbacks, disability does genuinely estrange you from certain experiences, certain goods. Like maybe you can't hike anymore or hear birdsong clearly. That's a real loss, not just a maybe waiting to become good.
And that's why focusing only on Aristotle's ideal life is tricky when talking about hardship.
Right. Philosophy, Setiya argues, should focus instead on the realistic range of good enough lives. Acknowledging that lacking abilities or experiencing pain is just part of the human deal for many, maybe most.
And pain, even if disability can be managed or accommodated, pain itself feels different. The book mentions studies, right? Debilitating pain strongly predicts low happiness in older adults.
Yeah, pain's obviously bad to feel, but figuring out philosophically why it's bad is complex. Even Descartes, who thought mind and body were separate.
The sailor in the ship idea.
Right. Even he had to admit pain showed the mind was somehow intermingled with the body, not just piloting it from afar.
So what help can philosophy offer for pain, if not a cure?
Solace, partly. Solace in being seen, understood. Pain, especially chronic pain, is often invisible, deeply isolating. Philosophy can bear witness to that particular suffering, and it can help debunk the illusion. And pain creates this idea that being pain-free would be ultimate bliss.
How so?
Setiya mentions Drew Leder's work on the absence of the healthy body. When you're not in pain, your body just fades from awareness, right?
Yeah, you don't notice it.
It's like turning on the lights makes you realize it was dark. When the pain stops, the anticipated bliss isn't some big positive feeling. It's just the absence of the thing you were focused on. You didn't notice the absence before.
That's fascinating. It reframes how you think about pain itself.
It does. And pain can teach compassion, too. Setiya suggests concern for your own suffering is closely related to concern for others, which leads him into a quick detour on moral theory. Specifically, the idea of the separateness of persons.
You mean like Rawls, Nozick?
Yeah.
The idea you can't just make one person suffer to benefit others.
Exactly. Suffering a root canal for your own future benefit makes sense, but inflicting pain on person A to cure headaches for 100 other people, that feels morally wrong, usually, because each person is distinct. Their suffering isn't just interchangeable.
But chronic pain kind of complicates that neat picture.
It really does. Chronic pain isn't just a series of separate bad episodes you endure for future relief. Leder points out chronic suffering affects your memory, your anticipation.
Hell.
You can literally lose the bodily memory of being pain-free. A future without pain can start to seem unimaginable. It reminds me of that Emily Dickinson line about pain, how it cannot recollect when it began or know if there's a time to come. It just is.
So the philosophical advice isn't ignore the pain, but how to orient yourself to it when it's persistent.
Right. Setiya suggests treating persistent pain, especially when you don't know how long it'll last, like a series of distinct, isolated episodes. Focus on the present. He quotes Alphonse Daudet. Treat illness like an unwanted guest and act as if the pains will vanish tomorrow morning, even if you don't really believe they will. It's a kind of pragmatic strategy.
Okay. Moving from the body's pains to the pains of connection or lack of it. Loneliness and grief. There's been so much talk recently about a loneliness epidemic.
Yeah, you see it everywhere. Headlines, government roles like the UK's Minister of Loneliness, lots of books about it in the US. There was that one study back in 2006.
The one saying people had fewer confidants.
Right, suggesting a huge jump in people having no one to discuss important things with compared to 20 years earlier.
But Setiya pushes back on that data, doesn't he?
He does. He points out that dramatic finding was probably a statistical artifact, basically, just caused by a change in how the survey questions were ordered.
Ah.
More recent careful research, like by sociologist Claude Fisher, suggests that overall social connection in the U.S. has actually been pretty stable since the 70s. The ways we connect might change, but the overall level hasn't plummeted like that one study suggested.
And loneliness itself isn't new either. Aristotle wrote about needing friends. Hume called solitude the worst punishment.
Exactly. The core point is the hurt of loneliness isn't some modern invention. It comes from our basic human nature. We need social connection.
You see that starkly in extreme cases, like solitary confinement.
Absolutely. An ACLU report described the effects as similar to physical torture, severe psychological distress, losing your sense of identity, feeling invisible.
It really underlines how fundamental contact is. But it's tricky too, right? Kant's idea of our unsociable sociability.
Yeah, that tension. We need others, but we also kind of recoil from getting too close sometimes.
Which makes relationships complex. Setiya looks at Aristotle's idea of philia.
Which was really broad, wasn't it? Covered friendships of utility, pleasure, virtue, even family ties. Setiya uses that broadness to highlight something that feels deeply true. Family relationships, romantic love, these are central ways we fight loneliness.
But he critiques Aristotle on friendship too, specifically the virtue kind.
Yeah.
Aristotle seemed to think if a good friend, went bad, you should stop loving them. Surely it is impossible, he says.
And Setiya argues that's just wrong. Friendship can be unconditional. You can still care deeply about a friend even if they've become, well, kind of an asshole.
Yeah.
The real value, Setiya argues, comes from the unconditional value we place on the person who is our friend, not just the relationship's benefits or their current goodness.
He uses that example from Michael Stalker, right?
Yeah.
Visiting a friend in the hospital, you do it for them, not just for the sake of the friendships.
Yes, that distinction is powerful. It shows that real love and friendship involve looking through the relationship to see the inherent worth of the other person. David Velleman calls love a moral emotion.
Because
It's tied up with morality, with recognizing human dignity. Respect is the minimum required, Velleman suggests. But love is an optional yet fitting response to someone's unique, irreplaceable worth.
So loneliness hurts so much because being cut off means you can't give or receive that vital reassurance that you matter. Friendlessness feels like your own value goes unseen, unappreciated.
We need that affirmation. And social science backs this up too. Research by people like Cacioppo shows chronic loneliness can become a vicious cycle. Lonely people tend to be hyper alert to social threats. They're less accurate at reading social cues, maybe less empathic, more negative, more self-critical. Even if they actually have good social skills, it reinforces itself.
So breaking out of that cycle is tough. How does the book suggest doing it?
It gives examples. Emily White finding relief through volunteering, joining a basketball team, shared activities with a purpose. And that study on Chicago commuters, people felt happier just by chatting with a stranger on the train. It suggests even small interactions can make a difference.
And Setiya's own experience starting a podcast during the pandemic.
Right. Asking philosophers personal questions, sharing vulnerability. It wasn't necessarily about forming deep friendships, but about making connections, discovering individuality, finding affirmation through conversation. He says it's astonishing how much individuality can emerge even in a short exchange.
It's a good reminder that connection comes in many forms, doesn't it? Not just one way.
Absolutely. Brief, unexpected, they all count.
Okay, let's shift from loneliness to grief. Another profound, often painful experience. Setiya describes it as complex sorrow, anger, guilt, fear, maybe even relief or lightness sometimes, like Roland Barthes has noted.
It's definitely not static. It's a process, it evolves, and he breaks down different aspects of grief.
Okay.
There's relational grief, mourning the loss of the relationship itself, like in a breakup. Then there's grief at the harm that death causes the person who died, mourning the future they lost, the experiences they'll miss.
Right.
And then there's grief at the sheer loss of life itself, the fact of oblivion. These often overlap, but they're distinct reasons we grieve.
Comparing breakup grief and death, grief is interesting there. A breakup is mostly relational, mourning the connection. Grief for someone dead is often both mourning the relationship and mourning the person, even if you didn't know them well, like Stacey May Fowles wrote about grieving strangers.
That distinction helps tackle a philosophical puzzle. If the reason for grief the person is gone is permanent, why does grief usually fade over time? Which leads him to critique Stoicism.
The Stoic view being, Like Epictetus saying, don't care about things you can't control, even loved ones dying.
Setiya finds that perverse, really. It tries to numb the pain, sure, but only by asking us to detach from the very things that give life meaning, freedom, the people we love. The pain of grief isn't some kind of error, it's tied to love. It's part of living a connected life.
So philosophy isn't about escaping grief, but maybe grieving well.
Exactly. Grief has reasons, these different forms of loss, but how it unfolds isn't dictated solely by those reasons. Like love, grief is an emotional process. It changes over time, not because the reason the death changes, but because grieving is something we do, an active way of relating to the loss over time.
And this is where things like social support, rituals, become so important. Setiya mentions going to a funeral.
Rob Clifton's funeral. He was struck by the community rituals, how people seem to know what to do, how to structure those disorienting days for each other.
And he contrasts that with mourning when those rituals aren't there.
Yeah, when his father-in-law, Edward Gubar, died suddenly during the early pandemic, no familiar rites. They had to improvise, watching basketball, buying a lottery ticket, just keeping in touch with friends. It brings up Lydia Davis's question, how shall I mourn them? You have to find ways that feel right, that echo the person's life, especially when the usual paths are blocked.
There's that permanent fact of loss, though. The dead seem to slip away as we live on. Setiya mentions the dilemma. Abandon them by moving on, or cling on and suffer.
The way through, he suggests, isn't either extreme. It's accepting the relationship changes, but not conceding it's completely over. He mentions Palaeogro insisting on dedicating books to the dead themselves, not just their memory.
Like a metaphysical point.
Kind of. The dead aren't simply unreal. We can still relate to them, speak of them, in a way.
And that idea of grief as deprivation, death being bad because you miss out on future good things. Does it make sense to grieve all deaths equally then? He mentions the Alvy Singer problem again.
Right. If death's harm is just missing out, why grieve a 90-year-old who lived fully the same way you grieve a child? Setiya notes, well, we don't grieve them the same way, but we do still grieve the grandparents' death.
So the object of grief isn't only about the lost future?
Correct. Part of it is facing the bare fact of oblivion, the end of that particular existence.
So summing up grief, these three forms, relational, harm-based, and loss of life itself, are all expressions of love, really. Valuing the relationship, wanting good for the person, cherishing their existence. Love, like grief, is complicated.
It's a much richer picture than just getting over it.
Okay, let's switch gears again. Failure. Living with that feeling, a specific project crashing, or just a general sense of falling short. Everyone knows that feeling.
Oh, yeah. Setiya quotes Joe Moran finding comfort in how common failure is. Most things humans try don't work out perfectly. But the focus here is that personal feeling of failure. Failing goals, risking defining yourself as a loser. Sports gives clear examples.
Like Ralph Branca, the pitcher who gave up the shot heard round the world, forever linked to that one moment.
Exactly. But Joshua Prager's book about it, The Echoing Green, shows Branca's life was so much richer and more complex than just that one failure. It highlights the sheer contingency, the chaos of life that can make one moment seem definitive when it really isn't.
And that's a key insight Setiya pulls out. Resisting the urge to create a simple narrative unity for our lives. We tend to boil complex lives down to a few key moments.
Which sets us up for this idea that a person can be a failure.
But reality isn't like that.
No. As Joe Moran says, to call any life a failure or a success is to miss the infinite granularity. A life can't really succeed or fail at all. It can only be lived. Setiya mentions Nicholson Baker's character in The Mezzanine, rejecting the idea that life is just transient, finding immense value in all the tiny, mundane details of just being alive.
Appreciating that infinite granularity, the digressive amplitude of being alive, that messy reality. It sounds like a way to counter the despair of feeling like a loser, but maybe also the arrogance of feeling like a winner.
It reframes what matters. Now, Setiya is clear. This isn't about ditching ambition. He spent decades striving in academia himself. But he looks back and regrets treating his life as a project to complete. That contributed to his midlife crisis.
And this leads to a really important distinction he makes. Telic versus atelic activities.
Right. Telic activities have a goal, an endpoint you aim for. Writing a book, teaching your kid to tie their shoes, finishing a degree.
Got it.
Atelic activities have no endpoint. They're about the process. Thinking, Parenting, the ongoing activity, not the goal of raising them, maybe political struggle.
And he connects this to Eastern philosophy.
Yeah, like the Bhagavad Gita saying your motive shouldn't be in the fruits of action, but the action itself. Value the process. He even mentions Dostoevsky writing The Idiot without a clear plan, valuing the creative process over the finished product.
So the argument is, we overvalue the telek, the results.
We tend to. We focus so much on the endpoint that we devalue the present, the process of getting there. And that sets us up for feeling like failures when the goals aren't met. Setiya argues a lot of life's value is actually in the atelic stuff, the ongoing process.
He's careful though, right? Outcomes do matter sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. The kid does need to learn to tie laces eventually. The doctor does need to save the patient. It's not that outcomes are irrelevant, but by over-focusing on the telek, we miss the inherent value in the process, and we make ourselves vulnerable to despair. He uses the Diggers as an example.
The 17th century radical group, Winstanley. Their project failed, didn't it?
In its immediate political aims, yes. But Setiya argues there was still value in their struggle for equality, in the act of protest itself.
Protest is an atelic activity.
Exactly. It can have dignity and meaning regardless of whether it achieves its final goal, which connects, surprisingly, to Groundhog Day.
The movie.
Read as a test of this atelic idea. Phil Connells is stuck. He can't finish any project that affects the future outside the loop.
Right, nothing sticks.
But he can change himself. Over all those years, he learns piano, ice sculpting, French. Setiya contrasts a Buddhist reading, seeing the now as emptiness, with his view. Valuing the atelic is about attachment to the present, engaging with its fullness. Phil's life is impoverished because he can't affect others, sure, but he makes the best of it by embracing the process, the present moment.
Okay, but how do you actually do that? Shift to valuing the atelic. Sounds easier said than done.
Setiya admits it takes work. Practices like meditation can help reorient you to the present, nurture that ability, but he stresses how cultural forces make it really hard.
Which links back to that idea of being a failure. He connects it to ideologies tying our worth to, what? Productivity, wealth.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
He cites Scott Sandage's book, Born Losers, which traces how we shifted from failing at something to being a failure as an identity. That solidified around the mid-1800s. Partly, things like credit reports started defining identity in terms of market value, commodity language.
And that combined with a strong individualist ethos, like Emerson, Douglas. Success or failure is all on you, ignoring circumstances.
Exactly. So the consequence is, historically, things like financial panics caused spiritual collapse. And maybe the deaths of despair today are linked to that internalized belief. Hard work must pay off. Refusal to see systemic barriers, lack of social solidarity, leading people to blame themselves, not society.
He contrasts that with the perspective of many Black Americans.
Right, who, as Ta-Nehisi Coates puts it, are often more acutely aware of the unjust structures shaping their lives.
So the conclusion there is
Yes.
that this idea of possessive individualism, seeing ourselves as just competing atoms judged by market value, fuels this destructive failure ideology.
Yes. And tackling it isn't just about material aid, it means challenging the ideology itself.
Which brings us right to injustice. Setiya asks a tough question. Why even bother caring about justice? Especially when solidarity often means taking on pain yourself.
It's like Plato's question in the Republic, isn't it? Why be just if you had the ring of Gyges and could be invisible? Glaucon's cynical take was, nobody would be just if they could get away with it.
And Setiya presents Simone Weil as this almost intimidating example of taking injustice totally seriously.
Her radical solidarity was extreme, eating starvation rations like occupied France, giving away her salary, working brutal factory jobs to feel the workers' suffering.
And that Alexander the Great story, she admired pouring out water because his men had none, refusing well-being if others suffer.
Weil was brilliant, a sharp critic, believed clear thinking could save human lives, but her intensity?
Nicknames like La Trolleuse, the Martian.
Right. Her model is so extreme it makes you doubt yourself. Do I really care if I can't live like that?
And philosophy has tried to prove we should care, right? Plato saying justice makes the soul healthy, Kant linking freedom to moral law.
But Setiya thinks those arguments don't really work on someone who doesn't already share the basic moral premise. You can't logically force an egomaniac to care. It's like arguing with a conspiracy theorist. You don't share the same starting points.
So what does make us care then?
Not abstract proof, he suggests, but moral perception. How we actually see the world, how we attend to others. He mentions Iris Murdoch.
Do so?
That truly paying attention to others makes it harder to treat them like objects. And Kristen Monroe's study of altruists, they saw someone in need and just perceived them as humanity plus need. Another human entitled to help.
So caring about justice comes from how we see people.
Mm-hmm.
And that perception, Setiya links back, is distorted not just by ego, but by ideologies like tying worth to productivity, making it harder to see the value of those deemed failures.
Exactly. And philosophy's role isn't just logic games, it's clarity of thought, a war against propaganda, finding concepts to illuminate injustice, figure out what to do, extending language to see into the dark spots, as Murdoch put it.
This leads him to critique ideal theory in political philosophy.
Yeah, like Plato's Republic or Rawls's theory of justice, starting by designing a perfectly just society, assuming everyone follows the rules.
What's the problem with that approach?
Setiya argues we don't need a perfect blueprint to see the injustice right here. U.S. history is full of it. Dispossession, slavery, Jim Crow, redlining. Ideal theory, by abstracting away from oppression, can actually hide the real problems. A utopia designed that way might not see race, for example.
And critical theory, like the Frankfurt School, emphasizes how ideology shapes our sense of what's even possible.
Right. We see automation as a threat, maybe, instead of liberation from drudgery because our ideology values labor above all. We can barely imagine different ways of relating to work or each other.
So someone like Adorno argued philosophy shouldn't design utopias now.
Pretty much. He felt we're like specimens in parched soil.
Hmm.
We can't fully grasp emancipation from within our distorted reality. Philosophy should focus on seeing what's wrong, focusing on basic needs. That famous line, tenderness only in the coarsest demand that no one shall go hungry anymore.
Setiya feels some empathy for Adorno's position, right? Retreating to art, abstract thought.
Yeah, he relates to resisting the tyranny of the ameliorative, that feeling that only activism matters in a crisis. Setiya argues we need to nurture other things too, art, philosophy, science. They're part of what makes life meaningful, what a better world would contain.
He brings up that encounter between Simone Weil and Simone de Beauvoir.
Right, while dismissing Beauvoir. You've never gone hungry, implying she couldn't understand, only action mattered. Beauvoir insisted the meaning of life mattered too. Setiya sides with Beauvoir. Climate change isn't just about preventing suffering, it's about preventing cultural devastation too. Meaning is tied to a better future.
Which brings us nicely to the last section, absurdity and hope. Setiya mentions his own philosophical start in that basic wonder or worry about existence.
That huge question. Why is there something rather than nothing? And the feeling Sartre called nausea, just the brute, unexplained fact of things existing. This links to the meaning of life question.
Which, surprisingly, is a pretty recent question, philosophically speaking.
Yeah, Setiya notes the phrase itself really only pops up in the 19th century with people like Carlyle. It seems to arise when life feels empty or meaningless, like for Kierkegaard.
Historically, religion often gave the answer, a big story where it all makes sense.
Often through theodicy, yeah. Pope's line, whatever is right. A narrative where suffering fits into a larger, ultimately good plan.
But for Setiya, the absurd isn't that the world is awful, necessarily. It's that the big question, what's the meaning of life, gets no answer from the universe itself. Our reaction feels arbitrary, as Frank Ramsey said. Camus called it the clash between our need for meaning and the world's unreasonable silence.
Setiya explores this need for meaning via that grim thought experiment. What if we knew humanity was ending, like in Children of Men or Scheffler's work?
Scheffler argued that knowing humanity continues gives meaning to our everyday lives, our faith in a collective afterlife.
Right. If that future disappears, apathy and despair can set in. But this brings back the Alvy Singer problem.
If future extinction makes the last generation's efforts pointless, does that pointlessness ripple backward and make our lives meaningless now?
Setiya argues against that. He thinks value doesn't only come from posterity. Things can have value even if humanity ends. That final generation could still find meaning in their actions, their relationships.
And this connects back to justice. How?
Setiya suggests justice, or the fight for it, is an antidote to absurdity. A world that's perpetually unjust would feel deeply meaningless. But progress towards justice, even small steps, can provide meaning. It gives us a truth that tells us how to feel, that striving for a just world is worthwhile.
But unlike a religious answer, this meaning feels precarious, unsettled, at risk, especially with climate change tied to injustice. So what should we feel? Hope? Despair?
Hope. Diogenes the Cynic called it precious. But Hesiod, with Pandora's jar, painted hope as maybe one of the evils, something that keeps us idle.
So hope is tricky, naive, essentially.
Setiya defines it carefully. Desire plus belief. You desire an outcome and you believe it's possible, but not guaranteed. You don't hope for the impossible or the certain, and it's not totally up to you.
Rebecca Solnit's idea of hope sounds relevant here. Not a passive wish, but something that shoves you out the door, makes action possible.
Exactly. Hoping well, Setiya suggests, is a kind of virtue. It involves belief, looking for reasons for possibility, and will, the courage to imagine alternatives to despair, and applying this to hardship. Hoping well isn't hoping for a perfect life or a magic cure for pain. It's finding possibility within the life you actually have, pain and all.
Hoping to make something meaningful of life with chronic pain, even if it never ends. Or hoping to connect with a loved one with Alzheimer's, even if memory doesn't return.
It challenges all those assumptions we've bumped up against. The ideal life. Happiness as the only goal. Self-interest versus others. Disability always being bad. Pain being simple. Friendship being earned. Grief being a mistake. Ending grief being betrayal. Life as a neat story. Responsibility needing blame. Life being irredeemably absurd. Philosophy, for Setiya, helps us question all that, find other ways to navigate.
So pulling this all together from our deep dive, Setiya's book really shows how philosophy, by looking right at hardship, pain, loss, failure, injustice, absurdity, gives us tools. Tools for coping, finding meaning.
Yeah, not by denying how hard life is, but by really acknowledging it.
It feels like a fundamental shift in perspective.
Yeah.
Valuing the process, finding dignity in struggle, recognizing unconditional worth, grieving well, fighting injustice thoughtfully, finding hope in possibility.
Not uncertainty, but impossibility and the courage to act on it.
So if the meaning of life is unsettled, as Setiya suggests, something we kind of forge together through striving for justice, maybe consider this. How might even the smallest acts acknowledging someone else's suffering, affirming their worth, holding on to quiet hope when things feel overwhelming, how might those tiny acts actually contribute to building that meaning bit by bit?